Hey guys, welcome back. I am here today with another story style video about my breast cancer journey. Today we're moving on to the next step after diagnosis, which for me was fertility. Since I have no children yet, I'm not married, I'm in a committed relationship, but no kids yet, and I wanted to make sure that if at all possible, we were able to have kids in the future, biologically, that were ours or mine or whatever. We'll talk about that as we get going. But first, let me start off with the fact that this for me was a fertility preservation and not an infertility issue. So, if you're one of my many friends that has struggled with infertility in the past or is currently walking through that, my heart is with you. I have the deepest respect for you, and I pray that you'll be able to have your own family with whatever means possible. So, with that, this is the most exciting part of the journey for me because the rest has to do with cancer. This was a little different. So, I may be a little lighthearted about it, but I do know that infertility is a serious issue for most people having to go through this. And so, I don't want to disrespect anybody anyway, but you'll find out. And I've talked to some friends along the way that their fertility stories are kind of similar, laughing things off because the hormones and the shots and everything that you go through that I'll share with you, you have to find humor in it because otherwise it's going to drive you crazy. So let's just get started. The first thing we left off with was the fact that, once again, I have plenty of notes because this was a long time ago and it was kind of like a one and done type thing and moving on. So I have notes to keep me on track. So we sat down in Dr. Cusick's office, which was the breast specialist, November 2nd, actually. I said November 1st, but it was November 2nd, to kind of plan through the entire course of treatment and what our game plan was. And so after all of that, we decided the first thing is going to be fertility, that we work on doing the preservation and meeting with a fertility doctor because of the fact that chemo can kill your ovaries and it sends you into menopause. So essentially, you aren't going to be able to have your own children if you don't do something to protect it. If you want to, it's a choice. You also have a choice to just go straight into chemo. So, the doctor that she wanted me to work with was Dr. Jaden in Wichita, which was absolutely great because I had already seen him for a extremely large uterine fibroid that was the size of a small cantaloupe. And so I already had a patient-doctor relationship with him, and I really enjoy going to see him, even though he sees the interesting into me, I guess. But so I enjoy seeing him. He is very knowledgeable. He's kind of blunt and has a great sense of humor, so he's totally my style of person. And so in all of this, that was like one of the first things that kind of gave me a little peace was because I already knew him, and we could go into that fertility preservation with that relationship already formed. And so sitting in that office, Dr. Cusick got out her cell phone and called his cell phone, and right away he answered, and she told him about, I have this patient, you've seen her before for uterine fibroid, now she has breast cancer, we want to talk about fertility preservation. And right away Dr. J was like, yeah, we'll see her tomorrow morning, call my secretaries and tell them to clear my schedule if they need to, but I will see her in the morning. So that was pretty cool, I guess. But so right away she calls the secretaries, which to me was interesting. He didn't tell them himself. Like he had her secretary call their secretaries, clear the schedule. So so that was the game plan that I would go on the very next day to get started in this. And so I took an extra day off of work at that point. Took a lot of days off of work in this period of trying to get a game plan solidified. But that day, my dad was the lucky one that got to go with me because my mom needed to work because she's also a teacher. and there's a little less flexibility in that. So he went with me. So shout out to my father. He is amazing. Um, he knows far more about my reproductive system than any father needs to, but he definitely didn't want me to go alone. And he took some outstanding notes. This is his little notebook. I can't focus it, but you can't really read it anyways. And he took pages and pages and pages of notes while we were there of what the doctor said, so we could go over them later, and so he would remember what was being said, because just like cancer, this is something we knew nothing about. So the first thing Dr. Dana did was he laid out the 5 options that you essentially have when you come in for fertility preservation. The first thing is to do nothing. Just take the chance of your ovaries not working. You aren't guaranteed, most of the time they do not start working again. You don't have a period again. You're in menopause. So you just take that chance and you just kind of keep on going. The second choice was that there is a medicine that closes off, I believe, the tubes or maybe the veins, I'm not sure, can't quite remember, to the ovaries. So it closes off that tubing to the ovaries, and so chemo has a much harder time to get through, and it's not guaranteed to work. As with any of this, it's not guaranteed to work. So it has a hard time getting through, but then when you're done with chemo, you take a reverse pill, and it will open that back up, and the idea is that you will have a regular cycle again. So that's number 2. Number 3 was removing your eggs for preservation, which is about 2 weeks of medication. You, once again, are not guaranteed to get any eggs whatsoever. A lot of my friends, this is the part when you're actually doing with infertility, that you don't produce the eggs even with some of the medicine. But you could get 2 to 22 eggs. My doctor said that at my age of 28, he would be happy with 10 eggs. So that was kind of our goal, I guess. And then he did say to expect anywhere from $15,000 to $20,000 up front. And to me, this is kind of where I try to cool my jets a little bit, because infertility is not covered by insurance whatsoever. It's something that I passionately disagree with. I think it's absolutely ridiculous. And so that's a lot of money when you're trying to have a family and you have to do multiple cycles of fertility drugs. You have to do multiple cycles of IVF. And so $15,000 to $20,000 for a one-time go. So you can understand why people struggle with having to go through this, because it's not covered by insurance. So if you are someone that is currently fighting with insurance or is trying to advocate for people having to go through that, I would love for you to get in contact with me, and I will do what I can to walk beside you on that and change the protocol insurance has on that, because I passionately believe that is wrong, not just for cancer patients, but for everybody. We pay for everything else with insurance, so for me, this just doesn't make sense. So, moving on, step back off my soapbox. But so that's number 3, is just removing the eggs. Step 4, or choice 4, would be to remove the eggs and then fertilize them as embryos and store them as embryos. So this has a much higher success rate than just doing your eggs, because they are embryos, they've already been fertilized, and implanting that is one step less that you have to do when you start IVF. And then the last one, the most interesting sounding one, I guess, number 5, would be ovarian tissue preservation. This is still very experimental, and it sounds crazy to explain this. So what they do is they actually take an entire ovary, they slice it up, and they preserve tissue samples. Then the idea is that after you're done with chemo or whatever, they take those slices, unfreeze them, prepare them, and they inject them back into you. Now, I thought they would inject them back into your ovaries and maybe it would bring your ovaries back to life. But actually what happens is, what they're doing right now is they will inject it into your arm, and it's able to respond to hormones, and you can actually see the eggs and cysts forming in your arm during a cycle, and then it will go back down when they're released. So the idea is that you create these eggs, and then at a certain time they will take those out with a needle and get them that way. So you have a chance of creating more eggs as time goes. So like I said, it's very experimental. That is in, you'd have to go to Kansas City or St. Louis to do that. And it was just not something that I think I was willing to do, because in order to do egg harvesting as well as the tissue preservation, which is what the doctor recommended that I do if I was his daughter, it would take 8 to 10 weeks. So that is 8 to 10 weeks of putting off chemo and getting started with treating my cancer. And I just couldn't afford to do that in my mind, especially because at that time we didn't know if it was anywhere else. We hadn't done the testing. And so I didn't want to wait that long. And the idea of doing that, the taking out an ovary and freezing it, just seemed a little crazy to me. I kind of had a hard time with that decision, because I know, because it's experimental, that unless more people do it, they're not going to be able to solidify that practice. And so, but with that too, it's not so new that they aren't charging for it anymore. At the beginning, they were doing it for free because it was extremely experimental. Now they're starting to charge you, and to me that adds just more dollars to what we were having to pay up front. And so I just kind of walked away from that one and decided that we would go the egg harvesting route. So I call this, there's a lot in my cancer journey that I call it the perfect storm. And with the fertility piece of it, to me it was a perfect storm because, like I said, this is November 2nd. In our doctor's office, they only do egg harvesting 4 times a year. In February, in April, in July, in November. We were in November, at the very beginning of November. And so thinking about that, it gives me chills, because it was just the perfect timing, which I completely understand why they only do this 4 times a year. It is a very intense month. They have a nurse, Megan, who is absolutely amazing. I just love her. And she is on call all the time. Like I called her at 10 o'clock at night, just making sure I was doing things right, because I wasn't 100% confident in what I was doing, because you only do this for 10 days and then it's done and over with. And so she's on call all the time. They have to do sonograms and blood work every 3 days. And so it's very time consuming. And so they only do it 4 times a year. And mine just happened to fall in November. The other thing was, that very day I did do a sonogram to look at my ovaries to see where I was at in my cycle. And once again, a perfect storm. I was on day 4 of a new cycle, a menstrual cycle. And so eggs were already forming, which they like to do it before. So like if you could start at day 0, that would be ideal. So I was already 4 days behind, but it still wasn't too late in my cycle that I would have to wait any more longer than that. So we were able to start right then and there. And they're like, we're starting meds the next day. Like, oh my gosh. So go in. I knew I'm starting medications and shots and pills the very next day. And the other part was, he wanted me to go home and decide and talk to my boyfriend about whether we were going to just do eggs or whether we want to do embryos. Because like I said, the embryos are a much higher success rate. And so I knew, kind of talking, before I even called him, I knew what the answer was at for both of us. And I was like, so really, I really need to call? He's like, yes, you need to call and ask your boyfriend if he's willing to fertilize your eggs. Like, okay, awkward. So we kind of laughed about it, but in the end, we talked a lot about embryo rights and what our beliefs were in that. So for example, if something were, like if we were to do egg fertilization, we had embryos. If for whatever reason that we didn't end up together, whose embryos would they be? Mine or his? And then also, if we didn't end up together and I was ended up with someone else and my ovaries don't start back up, I can't get any new eggs. I have eggs, but they're fertilized by somebody else. So that was one part of it. The other part of it that I knew his personal beliefs, and I don't know where I stand on this yet, to be honest, but for example, if you were to get 20 fertilized eggs, you have 20 embryos in a freezer, and if you use 4, are you willing to discard 16? Or there is a company that you can donate those to, so families that aren't able to produce their own eggs and sperm can essentially have your children. But I knew that he was not comfortable morally and religiously wise discarding embryos if we, for whatever reason, had 20. So I already knew the answer to that, but just wanted to kind of walk you through what that looks like for somebody who is not married. So obviously we went the route of just doing my eggs, freezing those, and we'll see what happens in the future and if they work, hopefully. So the very next day, this is all going on in one day. We were on to November 3rd, and I knew that the medicine would be arriving, and it was actually shipped to work, so at my elementary school, because I had to start that day when they arrived. There was no waiting whatsoever. So they arrived to school, and my school nurse, Karen, she was actually the one that gave me my first shot because I was too scared to do it myself. And so we got all that stuff, and she gave me my first shot, and I got started. And it came in a giant box, huge box, that was refrigerated. And so then I would take that home later that evening. So what I had to take every day was 3 shots and 2 pills. So the pills were for anti-estrogen. Even though I was estrogen negative, they still didn't want to up my estrogen. They wanted to keep it below 100 count-wise. When you're on all these fertility drugs, it's well over 600, and they did not want to do that. So the shots that I took were, for all my fertility friends out there, you may recognize some of these names: Organal, Minipure, Novarel, and I believe Cetrotide was my trigger shot, which I'll talk about here later. And for whatever reason, let's see, it was all sent by Integrity RX in Arizona overnight, and it came out, I don't know if it's insurance, I don't know. I think it was Livestrong, honestly, that paid for it. It was $80, but once again, I am hooked up with our county cancer council, and so they paid that for me. So that was really nice. And then those medicines was 1 epi style pen, and another was, you take the solution, you mix it, you take it into a syringe, you put it into another bottle that has the medication, you spin it around, you pull it out, and then you inject it. And so all of these ones, my dad did the first one, but after that I started doing them myself. You can do it in the bottom of your arm, in the fatty part, in your stomach, or in your legs. And so I chose to do it in my stomach for the most part, because that's where a lot of my extra flesh is. So that's what I chose to do. Something that really helped make all of this fertility drug make sense to me was the doctor told me that I believe it's a gland that humans have in our brains, and it tells our body only to release 1 egg at a time. And that is why we don't have litters like animals do. So cats and dogs or whatever, they don't have this gland that controls only 1 egg at a time. And this medication, what it does is it shuts that gland down, or shuts that communication off, and is like, let's do this, and just sends eggs to your ovaries. And so I thought that was interesting. That may tell you how many hormones are running through your bodies when you're taking all this medication, because it's just dumping eggs as much as possible because that gland has been shut off. So like I said, every 3 days you have to go in for blood work and a sonogram, and that includes weekends. So I went on Saturdays or Sundays, whatever it was falling on. And what they are looking for in those sonograms is that your eggs need to be a certain size to be harvested. So they can't be too small and they can't be too big because that means they're about ready to release or they're not going to be fertilized type of thing. And so they're looking for as many as possible in this certain range within a 48-hour time period. So I wish I had a picture of the graph because the one she showed me was pretty cool to look at. But so you want as many as possible in this range, and then 48 hours later, they harvest them. So they draw a circle on your backside, like right above your buttocks or whatever, kind of like your love handle. And at a very particular time, you have to take the trigger shot, which is the final shot that releases the eggs or gets your body ready to release those for the harvesting. And you have to jab that sucker in deeply, and my dad did that for me. But like I said, it's a very specific time that correlates with the time that I'm going to harvest the eggs. So my time that I had to do it was on Sunday, November 13th at 11:45 p.m. So we had to stay up on a school night, essentially, to trigger those eggs. And so I think I went to work on Monday, and then Tuesday was the egg harvesting day. At that point, you are bloated and achy and miserable because you are just full of hormones and your ovaries are weighed down by these eggs. It was awful. But so that morning, once again, my dad is the one that goes with me because my mom needs to work. And the funniest part of the whole thing is I go to check in, and they do other procedures there, but they knew when I checked in, I was coming in for egg harvesting. Now, when you go in for egg harvesting, normally you bring your donor with you so you can make embryos. And the lady at the desk she was busy, so she didn't look up and to see who was standing with me. And she goes, "So are both of you checking in?" It's me and my dad. It's like, no, he's my father. And she's like, "Oh my gosh." And she just starts laughing. And I look up at my dad, and he's like, "What?" It's like, "Dad, she thinks you're my donor." He's like, "She thinks we are mixing our sperm and egg together." Oh my gosh. His face, I wish I could have captured it. He was mortified. He just had to walk away. So, yeah. It cracks me up every time I think about that one. But so moving on, once again, like I said, insurance does not pay for all this, and when you do egg harvesting, you had to pay up front that very day. I was given a sheet that told me the approximate cost was $9,450 for egg harvesting that you pay up front. However, because I'm doing this for a life-saving procedure, the Livestrong company lets you do an application and they pay for part of it. So my cost was down to $6,850, which is still a lot for an upfront fee. But we knew we wanted to do it. My parents helped me out with that because I'm a single teacher. I don't have that kind of money saved, and so I'll be paying that off for a very long time. So, it's time to check in. I go in for the egg harvesting. It is the most embarrassing moment of my life. It's mortifying because you go in there and it's not like any other procedure you have done that they kind of give you like this chill medication or they put you out before they start the procedure because they don't want to give you the anesthesia very early because anesthesia can affect the eggs and damage them. So they try to give you the anesthesia at the very, very last moment. So essentially, you're in there on the table. They strap you up with your legs in the stirrups, strap you up, and then they wipe you down. So you got a warm rag, somebody you don't know, wiping your hoo-ha and your derriere to get things going. So, and then they put you to sleep at the very last minute. So it's not a very long procedure, maybe 30-40 minutes. And I woke up and they were able to tell me that they got 18 eggs, which, like I said, my doctor said he'd be happy with 10. So I was super pumped about that. And I knew through other stories that just to expect that not all of them are going to make it through the night. All of them, they test them or they look at them to make sure that they'll be viable eggs. And so I got a call the next day that said that 14 were able to be saved, which is so exciting and so awesome. And so I have 14 eggs out there somewhere, and I feel like I should have like a bumper sticker on my car that's like, proud parent of 14 eggs in a blah, blah, blah facility. So like an honor roll sticker, type of thing. But I don't. Maybe I should. I'll look into that. So those go into storage, obviously, until I'm ready to use them. They kept them at their facility for a short period of time, and then they send them to a long-term facility, which is called Reprotech. This is their little brochure, long-term cryo storage. And so they keep all types of reproductive tissue. And once again, you're paying a certain fee to have these stored. So I think it's about $600 a year is what I paid at first. They have a little different fees set in here. But I think it's interesting. So they have a Florida, a Minnesota, a Nevada, and a Texas facility. And so you don't really know which one your eggs are at. But each one is created in a certain way to protect it from natural disasters. And so I did find out, I emailed them, and mine are in Texas, and it says it features a DuPont storeroom capable of withstanding an F5 tornado. So maybe I need to go there because I'm so scared of tornadoes. But so 14 eggs are located somewhere in Texas, and they are split up into 3 different units, I guess. So 3 different freezers. So if something were to happen in one freezer, they have the insurance that there's still some left. And they are also stored in different tubes. So there's 2 in one tube at a time, which is kind of scary because that means they're already stored as twins. So if you have been through this, you know that a majority of the time they don't implant just one egg, you plant multiples. And so that'll be interesting to see down the road if I end up with multiples. So that is the journey, very long, but extremely short in a matter of 3 weeks of what the fertility journey was like. So if you have any questions about it or you want to share your story, please leave that down below. I would love to hear it and talk to you and kind of laugh about our most embarrassing moments. There's more of them, but some of them are not quite appropriate to share on the internet. So thank you for joining me today. The next one that I share on the topic of boobs and cancer will be the beginning of chemo, because that's the next step after doing this. So thank you for joining me today, and I will talk to you guys soon. Bye, guys.